Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice Podcast. The Heart of Hospice Podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode of The Heart of Hospice is being sponsored by Care Boss, the latest book by Jennifer O'Brien. Care Boss is the book that reminds family caregivers that they are the CEO of their loved one's care. Jennifer has served in healthcare leadership for over 35 years and was also the personal caregiver for her parents and her husband. Care Boss is written to empower caregivers, but it's more than just a book. It's a workbook and organizational tool as well. Check it out at jenniferaobrien.com.
Psychiatrist and author Dr. Robert Klitzman is here to talk about his new book, Doctor, Will You Pray for Me? Medicine, Chaplains, and Healing the Whole Person. Dr. Robert Klitzman is a professor of psychiatry at the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons and the Joseph Mailman School of Public Health, and the director of the online and in-person bioethics master's and certificate programs at Columbia University. Dr. Klitzman has written over 180 scientific journal articles, 10 books, and numerous chapters on critical issues in bioethics. He's a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also a regular contributor to the New York Times, CNN, and Psychology Today. You can find Dr. Klitzman's book, Doctor, Will You Pray for Me? Medicine, Chaplains, and Healing the Whole Person on Amazon and most major booksellers. This is a fascinating interview today. I hope you get as much value from it as I did. Dr. Klitzman and I talked everything chaplaincy today. He shares a personal story of his own around his sister and her death on 9/11, talking about how it inspired him to write the book. He says that he discovered there are many misconceptions about the work that chaplains are doing, not just among patients and families, but also among his physician colleagues. Robert's personal experience showed him the value of the work of chaplains, and he tells a lot of special stories that show those examples. Chaplains, he says, help people find meaning in a point when the patient is facing an existential crisis. He says that detached concern is the traditional way that physicians are trained to approach their relationship with patients, and that chaplains have the ability to help physicians connect with patients and families better, to be liaisons and advocates and mediators. So much to unpack about chaplaincy today. We're going to take a deep dive into this. I hope you enjoy it. There's a lot to learn. Dr. Klitzman, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm honored to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we're going to start out with an icebreaker question from the end of life deck, because of course we're all things hospice, death and dying. So the end of life deck is a great way to start out the conversation. So here's the question I chose for you. And it's regarding your important documents, will, life insurance, healthcare directives. So regarding those documents, A, your family knows exactly where to find them, or B, they are filed together and should be easy to find, or C, they may or may not exist, so good luck in finding them.
My family knows where they are, but that's partly because I have worked with many patients and families where it was unclear where they were. So I realize the importance of being proactive about that.
Yeah. I had a guest on one time whose father-in-law had died, and he said they decided they would call it the 18-month scavenger hunt while they looked for all of his documents and advance directives. He said it was a mess. A mess.
It's a big problem, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to confess that my advanced care planning is not complete. I'm probably one of thousands of healthcare workers, even end-of-life workers, that recognize the value of it, but it's, do as I say, not as I do. So I don't have mine in place either.
Well, I wrote a book a few years ago called When Doctors Become Patients, and I interviewed 75 physicians who became patients, and I was interested in what they now know and do differently with their patients, having been a patient themselves with a serious illness. And a lot of them said to me, I know I should get an advance directive, but I haven't yet gotten myself to do it. And of course, for many people, it's very hard to deal with the fact that we may die, that we only are here for a short time on Earth, and to plan for that and to admit it rather than just put it out of sight, out of mind is quite hard.
Do you think that people who work in healthcare with the seriously ill or the dying, do you think we're any better at getting those documents done, or do you think we're worse?
I don't think we're worse. I think it's surprising that healthcare providers who work with patients with serious illness aren't better than they are, because they have seen how many patients don't have advance directives, and there are often, unfortunately, conflicts that ensue between family members about what mom would have wanted, for instance, or dad would have wanted.
Right.
However, it's still emotionally hard.
Yeah, it is. And even though you see those scenarios, when you start applying it to your own life and thinking about your own family, because I have attempted to get started, and boy, when you start adding in the dynamics and who do you think in the long run, right? I'm anticipating this is 30 years from now for me, that who's going to be around and be responsible and who would respect your wishes and not try to go against the flow of what you originally said you wanted. It gets really, I found it overwhelming. I really did.
Yeah, well, I think it's also a reason that it's good to have people who work in hospice as professionals to help walk patients through this, and family members and doctors. I think also nurses often need more training to be able to talk with patients about this, because it's uncomfortable for all of us. And doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers are only human. And of course, doctors and nurses often also don't like to admit that, gee, we may not be able to keep all our patients alive. And often that's seen as failure if patients die, unfortunately. The fact, of course, is that we all die. But seeing it as failure, I think, is yet another impediment to be able to deal with it as well as we can.
Absolutely. So you are a professor of psychiatry with a focus on bioethics.
Yes.
How did you become interested in this very narrow topic of the role of chaplains in end-of-life care?
So thank you for the question. A few reasons or why I got interested in this. One is I've had the fortune of working with some wonderful chaplains through my career. Particularly, I'm on the hospital ethics committee where I work, and there have been wonderful chaplains there. And I also came to chaplains because As I mentioned, I wrote a previous book called When Doctors Become Patients. And when I interviewed doctors to see how they change what they do, a lot of them said, when I asked how have you changed, they would say, well, patients used to say to me, Doc, would you pray for me? And the doctors would tell me, I'd go, yeah, whatever. I'd poo-poo it. And then I became a patient with a serious illness and realized how important spiritual and existential and religious issues are. And yet I have no training to address that with patients. So that got me interested. I was struck by that. And then the other reason I got interested in this whole area, it was personal. So unfortunately, as I write in the book, my sister died on 9/11. She worked at the World Trade Center. And so she called her best friend at 8:30 in the morning that day, and no one ever heard from her again. And we had no body. The building went up in smoke. We didn't know if she was alive or dead or wandering the streets unknown. We just never heard from her again, and there was no body. And it was a very difficult time. It was a difficult time for many of us in New York and in the country and in the world. But I wondered, why me? Why was our family affected? And it was very hard to accept that she was just gone. And we had to go and report her as a missing person to the FBI. I had to eventually clean out her apartment with my family and get rid of her belongings. And then my body just gave out. And after a few weeks, and I thought I had the flu. I just felt comfortable laying in bed. I didn't want to watch TV or watch movies or read books or go to work. And friends said, well, this is grief. And I said, no, I have the flu because it hurt physically, like it hurt for my body to move. And I'm a psychiatrist. And we look down at people who somaticize. So we say a lot of primary care docs say that a huge percent of the patients that they see are complaining of aches and pains where it's really, quote, all in their head. And we sort of look down at that. But I realized how much grief, of course, my friends are right that it was grief, but I realized how much grief and suffering can be physical. And that it can be just, we know that these are biochemical processes going on in our body. So during that time, I went to my temple. I'm Jewish. I went to a church. Friends of mine liked that told me to come. I went to a Buddhist temple where we walked around and rang bells, and none of it did much for me. But then one day, just sitting in Central Park in the middle of the day, and I saw the wind blowing and blowing through the grass and through the leaves, and I thought, well, nature goes on. And that was very reassuring to me. And I realized how important spiritual issues are. And yet, in my training as a physician, I'd had no training or background or lectures on this. So I remember at one point, and I describe this in the book as well, as an intern, I had a young woman as a patient who was dying of cancer, who was Catholic, and I can tell that her Catholicism was very important to me. She had a cross that she'd put up at the foot of her bed. And she wasn't doing well. The chemo wasn't working. It was clear she was dying. And at first she would look at me with hope. And then she started to, over the week, just look at the wall and wouldn't look at me. And then one day, and so I said to my supervisor, I said, well, should we call a priest? And he looked at me as if I was crazy, like as if I had said, well, should we call a voodoo doctor? Like, what do you care?
Yeah, the shaman.
Right. It was all like, well, we focus on chemotherapy and her blood counts and how her body is responding, et cetera. And I thought like a fool for raising this, but that troubled me and that interaction. And then about a week later, I saw that a priest did visit her, and then she sort of perked up a bit. And unfortunately, she still died, but I realized that he was able to do something for her that I couldn't. And that stayed with me, but also the fact that medicine looked down at this kind of interaction. What is this spirituality stuff? It's all a bunch of hokum or whatever might be people's attitudes among this group of doctors. So I was interested in exploring for several reasons then sort of how patients, particularly at the end of life when facing death and dying, where do they come down? And of course, this is also part of the reason I'm interested in this is because we live in an age where there's a lot of polarization in our country. There's political polarization and religious polarization. So we have evangelicals. We have, on the other hand, we have a growing number of people who are spiritual but not religious, who are unaffiliated. So I became interested for a bunch of reasons of, how do other patients deal with death and dying? How do patients deal with this? Where do they find meaning and hope in the end? And as I started to think about this and talk to people, I realized that chaplains are the ones who really focus on this and play important roles. And so I started to talk to chaplains and then realized this would be a very important way of understanding their insights and their insights into how patients more generally today deal with these issues, what kind of challenges they face, et cetera.
Did you find, or do you find among your colleagues, physicians, that they have misconceptions about what chaplains do? And if so, what kind of misconceptions have you heard?
So there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So, uh, and among chaplains, and also among physicians, but also among patients and families and the public.
Yes.
So I wrote a piece for the New York Times a few years ago when I began to work on this, saying that it was important that doctors understand that religion could be and spirituality could be important for patients. And it's important as part of understanding a patient to realize that that may be an important part of a patient's life. And the article got hundreds of comments, and some people wrote things like the following: doctors should not ram their religion down patients' throats. So I never said doctors should ram their religion down.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a true statement. They shouldn't, but
Yes,
that wasn't your point, right?
That was my point. But I think it shows how religion is a touchy subject, and some people have whatever belief they have, whether they could be atheists or agnostics or evangelical or mainstream Orthodox, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever. But a lot of people tend to think that their belief is right, whatever it is. So, and there have been bestsellers on the one hand with titles like Proof of Heaven and God is for Real, about, I died and went to heaven and met God, and he was a guy with a white beard on a white throne, and their books like The God Delusion, that this is all nonsense. And so each side or different sides have their beliefs that what they say is true. And I think that, so if there are doctors who feel, well, science is the answer, then there is a negative set of attitudes towards religion, for instance. So I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings about what chaplains do. Some doctors think it's just not important, like who cares, like the attitude that I found from my supervisor. Other doctors feel, well, if someone wants to go and pray with the patient, fine, I don't care, whatever they want to do. But what I found is that chaplains actually play very important roles in helping patients and families with anticipatory grief or with dealing with profound existential issues. These are among the most profound existential issues we face in our lives, is the mystery of death and dying and how to deal with that and what we should do. And of course, some patients and families want everything done, even futile treatment. And others accept that, look, we may die, that the best we can do at this point is to make someone comfortable. And that, of course, is part of hospice. But a lot of people still feel, no, I want everything aggressively done. I want to keep mom alive at all costs. Let's add this treatment and that treatment, even when doctors say, look, it's not going to help. It's futile. So there's a lot of misunderstandings about what chaplains do in terms of the breadth of what they do and the content of what they do. So chaplains, in fact, often help patients and families deal with end-of-life decisions in terms of realizing that hospice may be right, or coming up with advanced directives, or making these tough decisions about should we continue nutrition or not, for instance, for mom.
Right.
I also found that chaplains do a lot of mediation. So they help when conflicts happen between patients and families or patients and doctors. And the book is filled with stories. So one chaplain told me, for instance, that there was a young man who had died. He had been in an accident and was brain dead at this point. And so he had said before that he wanted to donate his organs to help someone else. And so the doctor said, fine, we're going to wheel him in and unplug his life support machines in the operating room, and he'll die there, but you can't be there. And the family said, well, we like to be there when our son dies. The doctor said, absolutely not, because it's the operating room. It has to be sterile. The organs have to be harvested. I hate that word, as quickly as possible, and you'll just delay things. So they said, well, then maybe we don't want to give the organs. So there got to be just this butting of heads. And the chaplain said, well, let me talk to everyone. And the chaplain finally arranged that the family said they would go in the operating room for just 2 minutes when their son dies. When they unplugged, they would gown up and then they would leave. And the surgeon said, okay. So the surgeons rolled the patient in, the young man, the family gowned up. They were there, and the chaplain said to the family, did your son have a favorite song? And the mother said, Amazing Grace. So they all sang Amazing Grace, and the family sang, and the doctors joined in, and the nurses joined in, and everyone joined in singing, and then everyone started to cry. And then, but at the end of 2 minutes, the family left. And as they left, the mother took hold of the chaplain's hand and said, thank you so much. We got to sing my son into heaven. So those kinds of moments, I think, are special, obviously, and make a big difference for a family, and depending on the situation, for families. And that's something a chaplain did that no one else was going to do that. Another example, for instance, is there was a young boy who was dying, another young boy dying of cancer, and the mother had been going all over the country trying to get care for him, and it was clear he was not doing well and was going to die. And the mother wouldn't want to hear it. When the chaplain tried to say, we should, it looks like the treatment's not working, the mother would literally put her fingers in her ears and say, la, 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 I can't hear you. So finally, though, the chaplain was able to talk to the mother and said, look, I think it's important you talk to your son. So after the chaplain spent quite a bit of time with the mother said to the son, look, I think the treatment's not working. And the kid immediately say, yes, mommy, I know. And so when I die, I don't want flowers at my funeral. I want people to bring stuffed animals. And when they're done, I want them to bring the stuffed animals here to the hospital and give them to Sally and Tommy and all the other kids on the pediatric ward here. And the kid had figured the whole thing out. But he sensed that his mother couldn't hear it. And so, but the chaplain when the kid died, the mother arranged for the toys to be brought to instead of flowers at the service, and then brought them to the hospital, to the pediatric ward for the other kids. And it was just a wonderful thing. But again, that's something the chaplain arranged. Like, no one else was going to arrange that or be concerned about that. And so I think it speaks to the ways in which the kinds of roles chaplains can have with mediation, often with finding things out about patients. So another patient, the chaplain told me, came in with abdominal pain and got $1 million workup, and they found nothing. And a few months later, he came back with abdominal pain and got another $1 million workup, and they found nothing, and then came back again. And finally, the chaplain said, well, let me talk to this guy. And the chaplain said, well, when did the pain start? And he said, oh, January 19th, 2010. Oh, what happened then? Oh, my wife died that day. And so no one had sat down and talked to him about what was going on. And so I think it shows how chaplains can play a lot of important roles. Particularly, we have very fractured healthcare systems at this point. Everyone's busy, and all the staff have to be on computers, entering data into electronic medical records. And chaplains have this ability to have time to talk and get to know patients and families and find things out and help them. So I think they play these very important roles that are often misunderstood and not appreciated. I think it's a big problem. And that's part of why I wrote the book, is to show, look at all the amazing things chaplains do and can do, and how they can help patients and families.
Absolutely. I was struck by what you were saying about how physicians sort of discount the impact of grief and the psychological and the spiritual on the physicality, the physical problems that a patient might experience. But when you're talking about treating the whole person, mind, body, spirit, you can't discount or separate one from the other. Physical ailments affect you spiritually, affects you emotionally. You can't split those things apart. So
Absolutely.
The chaplain is the specialist. He's the expert in those things. This conversation is so good, but we're going to take a quick break. Hang on for more great content.
This episode of the Heart of Hospice is being sponsored by CareBoss, the latest book by Jennifer O'Brien. Jennifer O'Brien has served in healthcare leadership for over 35 years and was also the personal caregiver for her parents and her husband, Dr. Bob Limberg. She is the author of The Hospice Doctor's Widow, an art journal of caregiving and grief. Care Boss is her latest book, and it's more than just a book. It's a workbook and organizer that enables family caregivers to lead their loved ones' care sensitively and effectively. Jennifer writes with compassion and hard-earned wisdom, and readers will appreciate the empowerment and camaraderie they find in the pages of Care Boss. Care Boss reminds family caregivers that they are the CEO of their loved one's care. You can find Care Boss at your local indie bookstore or on Amazon and on Jennifer's personal website at jenniferaobrien.com.
So I want to talk about a quote that you have in your book. And I grabbed a hold of this quote. I mean, it's at the very beginning. It says, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." It's a quote from Arthur Schopenhauer. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. How does that apply to how we are caring for the spiritual health of dying patients?
Well, thank you. It's a great question. So to me, what that quote suggests is that, as I mentioned earlier, we all have our beliefs, whatever they are, whether we're evangelical or atheist or agnostic or spiritual but not religious or mainstream fill-in-the-blank religion. And there's a tendency to think, as I said, that our view is right. That, if you're not my view, whether it's evangelical, atheist, Orthodox, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Catholic, that is the truth. And other people are, I don't want to say no good because they don't have our beliefs. But in fact, this is, these are areas in which, nobody had, as far as I'm concerned, after speaking to chaplains who become very non-denominational, interdenominational, there is no one truth here. As one chaplain told me, there's 1,000 kinds of atheism even. So I think we need to be open-minded is the bottom line, I think, and to realize that particularly with end-of-life issues, the chaplain said that a lot of patients came in with the faith they had and it fell short. So some patients came in and said, I believe this, and then God let me down. Or, I prayed and then here I got cancer. God let me down. Or people say, well, my sister says if only I had prayed more, I wouldn't have gotten cancer.
Right.
Or I didn't really believe anything, and now I feel like I've been, a mean, nasty guy, and what's my life worth? And what kind of meaning do I have in my life? And so I think the notion that we need to be open-minded, that people change their beliefs, that people look for meaning and purpose and hope, and chaplains help people on their journey in finding that. But the journey it's often a journey. It often looks a little different than people anticipated. We need to be open-minded that other people may think about these things differently than we do. Other family members may think of it differently. The other quote I have in the beginning is from Leonardo da Vinci, which is paint the invisible as well as the visible. And my own sense, there's a lot of things we don't know about spirituality, about the nature of the universe, nature of the cosmos, and we look at that differently. One person I interviewed said, I don't believe in religion, but I believe in the third law of thermodynamics, that energy is neither created nor destroyed, it just goes on, which to me was a very spiritual notion. So I think it's to be open-minded when we're facing the end of life, to sort of embrace that, the fact that we don't know, there may not be much certainty, but that we may need to go from what the limits of our field of vision and realize that that's not the limits of whatever is out there or exists, or who knows what happened before the Big Bang, or, whatever. But, there's a lot of mysteries out there, and to accept that, because I think when dealing with death and dying, there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of mysteries. People want certitude in all kinds of ways, even about prognosis, but there's a lot we don't know. And to be able to suspend belief in that, or suspend one, accept the fact that we don't know things, I think is very important and can be helpful. At the same time, about chaplains themselves too, we start talking about how people don't understand what chaplains are, and a lot of patients don't. So one chaplain told me a story that he knocked on a patient's door, and he said, "I'm from the chaplaincy," and she put up her hands and said, in the cross, and said, "You are anathema to me, get out. My religion is CNN. I believe in politics and facts." And I said, "Okay," and he left.
Wow.
And the next, right, but he thought, he said she was basically a lonely woman who was dying, and they were in the hospital. So he went back the next day and got up the gumption, knocked on the door, and said, "Remember me?" And she went, "Yeah." And he, "Well, I know your religion is CNN, but what do you think of what's going on in the world today?" So they ended up talking about politics and built this relationship that was very helpful to her. And it turned out she was a lonely woman who was an atheist, but had a need for something else. But she had a misconception of what chaplains were, for instance, is the point. Another elderly chaplain I interviewed said that I said, "What do you do?" She said, "Well, I just spoke to a gentleman. I knocked on his curtain and said, 'I'm from the chaplaincy and I can give you, we don't need you. We don't need you.'" And his wife said, "Well, come in anyway." And she said, "Well, I can either give you prayer or good wishes." And he said, "Well, we don't want a prayer, but we'll take good wishes." And she said to me, "I basically say the same thing either way." I say,
I love it.
May the forces of the universe give strength to the doctors to help Joe here. And, may the force of the universe give the doctors the wisdom to know how best to treat him. And, may tomorrow be a new day for Joe. And at the end, Joe sort of grabbed her hand and said, "Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much." So there's a lot of misunderstanding out there when people say God, religion, prayer, spirituality. Some people, chaplains, who will run the other way. And I think to be open to the things we don't know about what's going on, about our lives, about death and dying is important.
Yeah, I do think we're at a time, we're recording this at the beginning of 2025. We are in a time and a culture where we're each very convinced of our own rightness these days.
Yeah,
absolutely. Right, yeah. And chaplains are all about entertaining the possibility that everyone has some degree of rightness and you are entitled to it. My perspective is that as a hospice nurse, I can support and pray in whatever fashion supports that patient and provides solace to the family without ever diminishing my own beliefs or betraying them or giving them up. It means I lose nothing of myself. And I think that's what chaplains do. They remain themselves. They don't give up anything of their own beliefs, but they are still able to meet a patient wherever they happen to be and provide that. A chaplain can talk about CNN if that's what is meaningful to someone's life. I find it striking. You have a statistic in your book. Speaking of prayer, it isn't surprising, I guess, medically ill older adults pray more than others. You have that in the book. That makes sense to me. But here's an interesting fact. 89% of patients think it's very important to have prayer, but only 58% of providers thought it was. That's a pretty big discrepancy.
Yes, it's a big discrepancy. And I think it suggests a few things. One is the variation, what we mean by prayer. So as I mentioned, when the one chaplain said, "I can either give you good wishes or prayers," and some people say, "Well, I don't want prayers, I'll take good wishes." And right, she basically says the same thing. So how do we define prayer? And what is prayer? And prayer could be many things. People may be looking for strength or hope or something beyond them, or it's a sense of trying to verbalize their hope for whatever it may be. One woman I interviewed said, "I'm not religious at all, but sometimes I get on my knees and pray to the God I don't believe in."
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because Most people pray. Some people pray, I read whatever the written out prayer is in a prayer book. Some people
Right.
say whatever comes to their mind. One patient I interviewed, and I interviewed patients for this and for other projects at different points, said, the church rejected me, or she felt rejected from her church. She had a history of substance abuse and felt that they frowned on that. But she said, sometimes I go to a river near my house and just sit by the river. And when I can't do that, I'll just turn the faucet on in my kitchen and just let the water go on my hands. And
Oh,
to me, that makes me feel better. And I realize that's part of the universe. And in my mind, that was sort of a form of prayer.
absolutely.
So I think prayer comes in different forms and can give people strength and hope. And doctors diminish that. And I think part of the reason is historical. So a few years ago, I was in ancient Greece. I was in Greece, and I went to Epidaurus, which is the site of the largest intact Greek theater from the ancient world. And it can sit 10,000 people. And famously, if you drop a pin on the stage, all 10,000 people hear it. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's famous. But what I didn't realize, it was actually part of a hospital. And it was within this compound, there was a theater and a hospital and a temple. And I thought, what a wonderful idea that if you have a hospital, you should also put there a temple and a theater. And I think that in the 19th century, as medicine became more scientific and we discovered about bacteria and viruses, then antibiotics, medicine said, well, we're going to be scientific, and all this other stuff is quackery.
Right.
Medicine's just going to be about the science. And yet, when I've spoken to patients over the years, and as I said, when I wrote this book, When Doctors Become Patients, and interviewed a lot of doctors who became patients, that's not the way patients experience their illness. It's not, oh, I'm just a scientific thing sitting here. Oh, it's just a biological process. It's in my body and I'm dying. It's part of, as you say, their mind, their spirit, not just their body. And I think that we need to bring these things back together. And I think that's part of the misconception that exists about chaplains, is what they do, but also why there's pushback and resistance.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about the cover of your book. I found it very striking. It's a photograph of two pairs of hands holding each other, but one of those sets of hands is gloved with medical gloves. Is there some symbolism there that's related to how healthcare providers, mainly physicians, the focus of your book, how they are separated from patients? Was that intentional, a little tongue in cheek there?
So it's intentional, but I would say it's both how doctors are separated but there. In other words, they're still holding hands.
Right. They still show up.
They still show up. The doctors are there. The doctors are holding the patient's hands, but they're wearing gloves. And sociologists say that doctors, to get by, and nurses need, quote, detached concern. They need to be concerned with their patients, but they need to be a little bit detached, because if you treated each patient as if it was your mother or your father or your son or your daughter dying, you wouldn't make it through the week, right? You have, 30 people dying during COVID, for instance, or just on any day, depending on the ward, there may be a lot of people dying. So you need to be concerned, be a little bit detached. And in some ways, we have that protective layer of rubber gloves. So I think it suggests both. Interestingly, by the way, the picture originally was with the patient's hands on top. It was reversed, and the doctor's hands on the bottom. So the patient was reaching down to the doctor. And I told him to flip the photo 180 degrees so that patients are reaching up to the hands of the healer. And you don't know who the healer is, if it's a doctor or nurse, but
Right.
the patient sort of reaching up, I thought, as sort of a sign of hope. So so I think it's the fact that doctors are there, they can help, or whomever is wearing gloves. I mean, sort of metaphorically, not the patient, the person in the hospital who's, but it's complicated, and they do things that someone without the gloves couldn't do, but it's not the same as having your mother there. And of course, in some ways, that's good. Chaplains often mediate between patients and families also. So it's a complex set of roles there in relationships.
Yeah, there is a practical application and rationale for the separations that we place between ourselves and our as providers and our patients. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you want to mediate that because you don't want to be either too far or too close. So you don't want to be too close as if every patient dying is your mother or your daughter or your son, but you don't want to be so far that you're callous.
Right.
And as a provider, sometimes we err one way or the other. We sometimes feel close and maybe too close and worry about the patient keeps us up at night. And sometimes we feel I should have been a little more empathic then. And part of the problem is patient doctors aren't trained well to deal with these issues. I should say so, just as an example of that, some of the doctors I interviewed say in retrospect, they realize that they've had patients who will say, for instance, doctor will say, how you doing? The patient will say, well, I just hope God's ready for me when I get there. And the doctor will say, well, did you take your medicine this week?
Yeah. Whoosh.
Whoosh, missing the cue. So I think you want to be and trying to remind doctors to be present, to be there, not be distant. They're going to be a little distant, but not be too distant.
Right, right. So I'm fascinated by your book. Tell me, who can benefit from reading it?
So I think everyone. I wrote it for everyone, for a broad general audience. The patients, family members of patients, and all of us are or will be patients or family members of patients at some point. We're just people where everyone's on a spiritual existential journey in some way, or most people I know are. And it can help us. I found chaplains have immense insights, and these stories of helping patients find meaning, I found incredibly inspiring. I mean, another chaplain, for instance, in the book, said he was talking to an old guy who was dying and had felt he'd been a mean son of a bitch his whole life. And like, why am I still here? What's the point of living? And the chaplain stood there and picked up the piece of bread from the patient's plastic meal tray, and said, look at this piece of bread. Bread is amazing, isn't it? I mean, it grows from the earth. It gives us nutrition. Jesus said he's the bread of life. Let's just think about bread for a minute. Let's just focus. Maybe the point of life isn't to have done a lot of things or done great things or always been there as much as we should have been, but maybe just to enjoy each moment we have and appreciate the little things in life. And the patient totally responded to that. So I think that little stories like that remind all of us as we go through life and get crazed with pressures or busy or end up saying the wrong thing to someone or not being as nice as we should be or compassionate, and we get angry or whatever the issue is, that we get troubled or feel depressed or anxious, to just focus on, the moment. And the book is filled with stories of how chaplains help patients do that. And I think these are inspiring life lessons for all of us.
Tell me, what did you learn about chaplains that you didn't know before you wrote the book?
So a lot of things. So one is the amazing range of things they do. As I said, sort of the mediation they do between doctors and patients. Also the ways they help doctors. One chaplain said, for instance, that during the COVID pandemic, one chaplain said she developed chocolate rounds, like there were grand rounds. So she said that she could see this the staff, nurses, and doctors were stressed out. So she went around with a box of chocolate and said, I do chocolate rounds. I'm doing chocolate rounds. Would you like a chocolate? And they'd all say yes. And they'd take a chocolate. And she said, well, and how's your day going? What's going on? And they said, well, we just had 3 patients die this morning and blah, blah, blah. And so she was, able to connect. Another chaplain said that during COVID, she put up a wreath on the, a sort of what became a wreath on the nursing station wall, and had slips of paper and said to each person, write the name of someone you've lost recently, whether it's a family member, a friend, or a patient. And the wreath soon filled up. And at the end of the pandemic, when it was going down, she was going to take it down and up from the wall. And people said, no, leave this here. It's really a reminder of what we've been through together.
Yeah.
Chaplains sort of fill in these voids of meaning and purpose and connection and hope in ways that are hard to describe, but important. And I see why, on the one hand, doctors might easily say, oh, it's all nonsense. But these are the things that make our lives. Things we all have needs for purpose, for connection to something beyond ourselves. whether it's nature or religion or our families or creative work, whatever it is. And so I think chaplains speak to that. And it's something that in our crazy world, in various ways, it's easy to lose sight of. And I think that chaplains bring us back to that. And seeing how chaplains do that, I think, to me, was incredibly important and eye-opening. So I think the ways that they help, the different ways they help patients, no matter what the patient's belief is, the way they help doctors. The other side is the way they're misunderstood. So they're under-resourced.
Yes.
Chaplains are outside the VA system. Chaplains are not reimbursed. So hospitals have to cover the costs out of pocket. A third of hospitals, or about 25% or a third of hospitals, have no chaplains at all. And a lot of hospitals have one or two chaplains who can't see everyone. So I think they need, from a policy point of view, we need to appreciate them more, consider having some reimbursement for them. Maybe if they talk about advanced directives or whatever it is. So I learned how they do an amazing range of things, but are unappreciated and even on ward. So one chaplain told me that during the COVID pandemic, she saw the nurses were suffering and decided to have a little discussion group. And she went to the nursing supervisor and said, "Can I do this?" And the nursing supervisor said, "Absolutely not. Nurses all need to be doing their work on the floor." And she said, "Well, this can help them." No, no, no. So she said, "Well, let me just try it once and maybe could you come?" So they had it and all the nurses burst out crying. And the nursing supervisor was shocked and said, "Please keep doing this."
Yes.
So I think the way in which they're ignored, the need for meaning and purpose and hope is sort of ignored. I think these are things that I learned and that I think the book can help remind all of us about.
Yeah, so much value there. Where can my listeners connect with you and find your book, Doctor, Will You Pray for Me? Medicine, Chaplains, and Healing the Whole Person.
So I'm on social media. I'm on formerly Twitter, now X, LinkedIn, and at Robert Klitzman, Klitzman. And also the book's on Amazon. It's any local bookstore can get it. Just walk in and ask for it. But it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Nobles, any bookstore, etc. will have it. The online will have it, and the bookstore will either have it or can order it for you.
Awesome. I'll have links in the show notes so that people can go in and connect with you and find the book. My copy gets here day after tomorrow, weather permitting. So, Dr. Robert Klitzman, thank you so much for being on the show. I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.